우르라나 멘라라관이야다 산제 주단 소지 초나노 장주바두다니 제다괴 제인지외소나 로라벤제 산제 주바조 산제 주다 소지 초나 장주바두 단니 제수시다괴 취진지외소나 로라벤제 산제 주바조 산제 주다 소지 초나 장주바 제수시다괴 취진지외소나 로라벤제 산제 라라라면 매담명지 원보다 제전에서 철저로 저와저번에 선제선보다 되시신의 주로 대다시지 대배신이 되는 데제 대배제전에 되는 제사위대 주고 전제제바들라 초로대요고 네라면 야야선서 선생님 매담 배단이라고 돌아 투배선이 제 나무라에 같은 루단이죠 주부무다 다음에 로군지 자나 지점바 삼제 깨도다 그체den도 나도 다 들리다 간소리 다간 우리 저가 송지라 들이요 저가 상 송지라로 나시시바 세자이 중고 나스 나시시바 세자이 중고 나스经过那些去年提着月啥给南改吃，东北你吃么当着哇？月啥给俺们吃吧，现在也经过了。你看是觉着天气那路是天南大，觉不当着哇？俺们天气那路是天南大，是吧？落见嘛一东把银行都下，连线嘛一东把银行都下。是吧？我让什么家园都马上，东边俺来下，让个什么家园都马上，我东边俺来下。我看是真的这些人，让什么家园都马上，俺的前边俺就送，前边姐妹的兄弟，俺的前边俺就下，我都送那些，他第一个的送我的，三俺就看上看你。东西那些东巴些给东巴的我送过来是吧？东巴肯定的是干了，俺呢那些是把写下已经过下是干了，俺呢缺钱，东巴你点了别说给洗缺钱的钱，那些是吧？写下他们家给经过是吧？我这写下他们家给点都，俺呢去年提着。现在让给定到，俺那家家让星期出啊，嘎巴给每个东北年轻，我听着我的看是去年的钱，听着我的让现在俺那前面来把马修我演唱，去年提着，俺那听他们点吧，俺那西月啥，我月啥，我也去年是这月啥给哪个提给，俺那现在他们家来敲我的，是是吧？这大主，他觉着屯进的内陆是天南大是干了，俺那天这边内陆的旁边两下一其他我去都绝对没，是吧？其他我去都绝对没吧？马上绝没写了跑到钱，谁有哪些钱呢？旁边会写的去年其他，谁做其他我去都没没的吧？你绝对没的吧？俺呢，我。看说的3.3毛多吧，3多没吧？我等印章去年提着月啥钱那个吃来的，觉着我的觉着天气啥些天那大，就说你看说的，他给我了那些没意思，让个那些。他不嘎家做对战吧，俺那那些给嘎家谁干了？ 아니 강아라와 샤바나 세체네 샤와자 많이 봐 러제기 저와 진짜 많이 미세요도 러제니 저 동바 당 자신에서 러제당 텐디기도 많이 봐 아니 가서 러제니 동바 많이 봐 러제 가서 러제 자신 아니 라섬 동병아도 샤 세다 들어하는 거도 잡자 야
No. So, as the master Kelsang Gyatso, the seventh Dalai Lama, he has a verse which says that within the sort of mandala of knowable objects, all of the sort of internal objects that we have, so this is referring to all phenomena that appear to the mind, then the next line continues saying that they are all pervaded by the sky of the Dharmata, or this, they are all pervaded by emptiness. So without creating or fabricating anything with the mind, place the mind in clear light. And then it continues saying, don't just like space out into nothingness, but rather place the mind with mindfulness. So here, this verse, the beginning of it is talking about the sort of mandala, or all of the various knowable objects. And so here, one takes an object to then be able to determine the meaning of emptiness, takes as a basis a phenomena to then determine what it is that is the object of refutation, the object of negation. And so here, all phenomena which are conventionally appearing to us, which are objects of our knowledge, are ultimately free from all of these kind of adventitious stains. They are all pervaded by, as it likens this to the sky, of clear light, of suchness. So they are all empty. They are all pervaded by being empty. And so here it says then, to place one's mind in this state, or this nature which is free from expression, which is inexpressible. So here we often see the perfection of wisdom referred to as beyond expression, beyond thought. So here, for a yogi experiencing direct perception of emptiness, there are no phenomena which appear. There is nothing that is appearing to them besides this nature of emptiness, the clear light wisdom. So here it says to place one's mind in that state of meditative clear light experience that is pervading all all phenomena. And one here is then, the next line says to sort of abandon all of the kind of mental creation that one normally engages in. So here again, this is referring to the fact that when determining the meaning of emptiness, that which is being negated or refuted is not some sort of emptiness which is created by the mind, which is somehow fabricated, but rather this is a natural state, of natural quality of things. And so here one needs to properly identify what is being negated, which is the way that we're actually grasping at things. It's not something that is created or fabricated by our minds, but rather we need to get at that innate kind of grasping that we have. So here, this verse is related to all of the things that we have been talking about. So within this sort of mandala or sphere of all of the knowable phenomena, they are all pervaded by this ultimate nature of clear light, of emptiness. And so one should place one's mind in this inexpressible state, not giving rise to anything that is fabricated or created by mind, and place it in that state with mindfulness, not just sort of checking out into nothingness.
Oh yeah, that turned out already. 갈서오래잖아. 나셔서 또 뒤디가나. 나셔서 봐 세자이经过도 세가나 최전. 안에 나셔서 봐 최탐제사. 그러 아니 뒤뒤도 아니 가서 된다면서 신이 된다면서 지나가 캡시가나 뒤대로 아니 가자 라시 주밤 양반 주와 까바기 아니 신이 된다면서 아니 다 민민남 같이 받쳐 nanga chapse nanga de tobere ja kasam la nanga joba na shin chene o ane gaja denru kasam ji mega deng ane mega inba wo tigi ane chejen na zo la chabare ro chabare chejen na zo la chabe chini de 가점 된로 가자지 내가 신이지 아니 제자 내 제도 매봐 다 zanjia ane kaso papa ishi ki chidara siwa chidu ane kaso jayi chidu meba sandu meba jeja tenji nelu tadu sira ane che tagi ane nelu de karere sara nelu tadu de ane rashi ji tongbi ngo neba inba o jeja tenji nelu shik tena da ane 제가 tenji nelu shik tenja wate ta nelu ngo wate tere 아니 텐데 내로데 아니 가르서에 평안만 되바 나시 러시아 마인바 러시아 당이 제위 도마 마인바 러시아 마인비아 아니 동빙아도 샤 텐데 위 내도 되라 암 동반이 샤네 세세sem 텐데 위 동반이 되라 但了把过来是他东把你了提定的下是让什么家人都马上按你东兵啊那下我听着有东把的什么家人都马上吧大家听着嘎子面每个地听着让什么家人都马上东把听啊都下看把姐妹都送的去点了拍比天的看白呀马些把钱的按你他东把听啊就送过来是他的么的
So here, the first line of this verse again says in the mandala of all knowable objects within samsara. So here, this is referring to all phenomena, all inner and outer phenomena, which is the basis on which one comes to determine emptiness. So on the basis of these knowable objects, one comes then to investigate and determine their actual ultimate nature. So by taking an object, a basis of a knowable object, and then investigating, one comes to find its ultimate nature, the fact that it lacks intrinsic existence. So one establishes or comes to the realization of this non-affirming negative negation, which is the negation of that basis having some kind of intrinsic or true real existence. And this nature, this state of the dharmata, this ultimate reality, those are just like synonyms. This is something which is pervades all things, the way sky, space in being the absence of obstructive contact is pervades all things. So this is a nature that applies to all phenomena. And this state, this suchness, the dharmata of phenomena, is something which is inexpressible, other than the sort of experience within an Arya's wisdom. This is something that can't be thought, can't be expressed. This ultimate nature, being empty of intrinsic existence, is something which is beyond our ability to express that. That lack of intrinsic existence is something that one sees directly within the meditative equipoise of a superior being, but it's not something that we can sort of express in our normal vocabulary. And so this actual nature of all things, this it says then place one's mind in this state which is inexpressible and not creating or fabricating anything with the mind. And so here this state of emptiness is not or the emptiness that one realizes is not something which is partial or which is fabricated by one's mind, but rather this is the natural state of phenomena. And this is not something that we have created with our mind, but rather we have come to realize it through this process of first taking a basis and then searching for its true or intrinsic existence, and that not finding that non-affirming negation which one realizes, that is the natural state of things. It's not something that we've created. So having determined the meaning of emptiness, the verse then concludes by saying one should place one's mind with mindfulness emptiness on that topic. So one isn't just sort of checking out, letting the mind just become overly expansive or not be focused on anything, but rather this meaning of emptiness, which one has determined, that is what one should place one's mind into and hold with mindfulness.
Oh yeah, that the Chandam Dambam and the Tongba say, I did that in the chair. They in that chill good Nelu de Canadian nowadays, turned about Rashi Tombong or Neva. Rashi Chu, Tadashawa Nashi chair. Tanangula Candanagore, Sena, that Long Yang Nawatela. 安尼提我的来写的，说着啦，那晚那做初入给许多那些，那些是把给安尼写下来，那我初入些呢，那么些初入。每个那些，每个那说，那我每个那些呢，安尼一个那些给把这，那晚那做初入给许多，初入给我啦，安尼看得见那个人为啥？可能给。 제 코랑 게 라신데다 가자든로 가고 동신기 동배 라신데데 나나나둘라 간다나 그래 세가나 아니 가서 심에 짜자 시자네 매봐 자와나 차와 아니 니제스나 덴바 추바다 군족 덴루기 아니 가서 나와텔라 니제지 사시 송 사라스레세죠 공마 사라스라고 왜
네, 챙깁니다.
사라스리 가르치는 면도다. 사라스리라. 잠민다 하오나. 심해자자 뉴제지 사시동. 루지 규메 담모지 되나다스. 라니 루어 쳐봐 그 규만하신 게 담모지 되나다스가 루지 규메 다오데 규메 대신 달란도와 뭐라 달란도 친랑도와 어때 나시 치다나고 오 대다장 라시지 주바 말에 매나야 라시지 주바랑 나와 예자 르지 주민 담모지 되나 되나다스 된다위 당 낭주대 미담바이나 민장 대노 마냠스 담바레스 마삼스 라 안에 가서 동병안도샤 라슴 자야도 마소 나동경안도샤 참바 제메도 수제 나동경안도샤 나랑 장시지 주와 나장 퇴기 장시지 주에 동바 될래로도야
So the next verse of this continues talking about the way that things appear to us. So although all phenomena, if you come to determine the meaning of emptiness, one recognizes that ultimately all phenomena are empty of intrinsic existence, but yet they appear to us as if they had some kind of true or intrinsic existence. So in the next verse of this by Gyawa Kesang Gyatso, he says that on the basis of our six sense powers, there's sort of like all of the busyness of these appearances. Things arise and appear to us, and they're as though they were like a deceptive sort of illusory show. It's like we're watching this show of these deceptive illusions. The things appear as though they had some kind of true existence, although they are not truly established in any way. Phenomena appear to us as though they had that kind of existence. And so here in this next verse, he's talking about the way in which all phenomena appear to us. They arise in such a way as though they appear to have true existence. But he continues the verse saying, not thinking this is true. So we should give up that sort of thought of grasping at these appearances as though they had some kind of true existence, having come to recognize them as being like this sort of deceptive show, this illusion in the way that a magician like conjures up illusions. We should recognize that they aren't truly existent. And so not thinking this is true, one then again is advised not to just sort of space out, but place one's mind on appearances appearances and emptiness, place one's mind with mindfulness on this idea of appearance and emptiness, the fact that although things lack true existence, they appear as though they had that kind of true existence. So this next line, or this next verse, then gets into the way that although things appear as though they had some kind of true, real existence, they are illusory, and so one should place one's mind within a state of recognizing appearance and emptiness.
Oh yeah, that thing is chima digi, and nangshi tongba said. Nawa naso yoade, and that total namshi total candidate in a young, and Maribada tea, Pacha Karo, Lebachi, Yizang, Kola, and Suda Tiro, Soto Botella, Suda Tiro, Candidate Nana Yang, and Casore, Shimetata. Rashi Chua, Shitawa Meba, Shimeba, and Tawan Tawa, Kitani Rashi Chua, Shimetaza, Niji said Tajishuana, Kunzo Ginawa Dang, Chijan Kunzo Watedang, Rashi Chubinawa knew the image Chani. Niji Sassi Tongs, Roa, or Dingi, that Nawata Majuba Yenza, and a Jumatan Trawa Yenza, Nujimi Damoji. Give me this in Dalandona, Dalang Tone, Midemba Teshindu, Chidango, or Guyang, Rashi Chua Naya, Rashi Chiva Tomba Yenzang, or Midemba Yenzang. Did you meet them with the Dana? Then I said, or the Dano Mayams, or the Temple, now what the Chuba Mari. Nandong to Sha, Ranshi Chua, now what the Ranshi Chua Tombing to Shakore. What the did it, and that would be Kundu to Shagore.
So then this next verse is dealing with the way in which things appear. There's sort of the way of positing conventional existence of things. So on the basis of the coming together of objects with our six sense bases and the sense consciousnesses, we give rise to all sorts of different appearances. We have forms and sounds and so forth. All of these things appear, but if we search for them within their basis of designation, they're ultimately unfindable. There's no sort of thing there on that basis. So they appear as though they had this kind of true, real existence, but yet they are lacking in that kind of existence. And these two are inseparable. So they're appearing as though they were truly existent, as well as lacking that kind of true existence. In this way, appearance and emptiness are inseparable. So here again in this next verse, it's saying that there is sort of this whole illusory show that appears to us. So like the way that a magician conjures up a horse or an elephant, and it appears as though it were a horse or an elephant, but it really doesn't truly exist as such. In this way, all phenomena appear to us as though they had some kind of true existence, but they lack that existence. So here it says, without thinking, all of this is real. So you're witnessing this whole sort of deceptive, illusory show, and without thinking or grasping at it as being real, it then continues saying, don't just space out, but place your mind with mindfulness on appearance and emptiness, the sort of inseparability of appearance and emptiness. And here again, this next verse is getting at the way of positing conventional reality, conventional truth.
Oh yeah, that he 가서 텐드비 아니 나시 동바 아 동시 나와 이제 좀 된다라 아니 다 연중 순교권에 아니 더바기 아니 더바리 가서 낸데 더바기 다 selun부에 가상 참대 아니 난이와 좋아지게 순이 세대로와 어떤 주 좋아지게 수대라 人家其他看错呗，说个几年嘛，你把去了军赛一切把电影搞完3年，你是大家都找几个出的了。那你看着说的，现在那你去看来的话，我讲其他个是7万个，其他个把马新吧。 其他个看着，人家其他个看着大多，但主要是吧，今年这些东西让我们买吧，其他新的看了，旁在的主吧， 선보세양 계위 선보세양 치위 남제라도 예전에서 주변 남주도 교와 전에 교와 가상 그 소환나 시전에 당가라도 치고라 카초니 마도고 연장 치다 카르 치다 그 카르 다도 초위 아니 소그 규만도 봐 소그 규만도 봐 소그 규만도 봐 아니 마누바데 아니 단조 때문에도 마서와서 다 다른 예바까지 얘나서 대연시와 아니 단조 그 대상보데 라와데라 아니 때문에도 마서와 아니 dembanyame sajasinge demba lana meba sayade 아니 다 lana mebe demba 마완다 meba 켈라 아니 체매 참비 이시 중생에 바디앙 아니 가서 이 체매 참비 이제 중생에 바디앙 다니 스바데 중내 신비 아니 가와상보 토보냠도 진호 진호세한테 대인바래와 연자 치다 칸어 뱃속의 주님은 봐 자체라 주자 이제바 디가만 참는세 요래네 많이 봐 담발라나 메발라 체매 참비 요데 좀 체매 참비 이제 준생에 봐 대야 단이 스바 촌에 제가 가와상보 토보냠도 삼성어서 하지래 야
So here, then, with regard to the appearances and emptiness being conjoined, the things appear although they are empty. Here, Gelama Tsongkhapa is praising the Buddha for having taught this way, that things which are dependently originated are empty, and that which is empty is dependently originated. And so here in the text, we had left off at the 36th verse, or the beginning of the 36th verse. So here, this verse reads, "Nonetheless, before the stream of this life flowing towards death has come to cease, that I have found slight faith in you, even this I think is fortunate." So here, this is the second outline point, wherever we are in the outline, of the way of giving rise to joy, how one generates joy. So here it says, however, before, so it's as though we are in the mouth of the Lord of death. From the moment we are born, we are moving towards death. And so here he uses this imagery of being, it's as though we're always in the mouth of the Lord of death. We're approaching death all the time. And so at this time, before the stream of one's life has set, or before this stream of life has ceased, not letting one's life of leisures and endowments be meaningless. So here we have this opportunity right now, all of those sort of freedoms and endowments necessary to practice the Dharma. So we shouldn't let this go to waste. We shouldn't let it become meaningless. And so the fact that one has met the unsurpassed teacher, or has found a little bit of faith brought forth by a valid cognition that this teacher is a valid being. So here, this unsurpassed teacher, having found faith in you, this I feel too is a fortunate sort of opportunity. This is very fortunate that I have found this kind of faith in you. So here he is saying that even not having realized emptiness, to have found some kind of faith in the teacher before this stream of life has ceased, this too is a very fortunate thing.
Oh yeah. 다들이 대체 제랑게 토나 동아지 남진에 개발자 충주 다 간절히 동아지 남진에 개발자 간대송 충주사 또 돌되나 안내라 우리 양루고 요나시 전에 당보자치 태와 만두자 파도 흉루 탐자 남바르샤 아니 타만 인생 군도 냠수랑 그냥 담바제 최동호 전에 소환하시 담보 아니 태와 대내 삼바 대내 안에 공중그 관에 관리 다 냠도 충주다 라리 냠고 나시 전에 봐 충주당 되니 표지 준다 양다 다는 게 쳐봐 세가라 아니 다 말아봐 가시기 아니 다 가서래 최남지 다 돈이 좀 마셔봐 아니 다 가서래 된단데 봐 세상 많이 버텨발라서 와 파배냥서 띠루디던 거라서 다 마음부지하러 어떤 적이 주대양다다 다는 게 쳐봐 씌워서 같이 왜 논된 남지 아니 같이 돼서 마소와 와 대섬치에 같이 돼서 만져봐 랑기 난기 아니 염원 되비 시도 아니 대산을 배버렸어
So here then it continues saying, as for the way in which Je Rinpoche himself gave rise to the particular points of the path of Sutra and Tantra, and the way in which other earlier Tibetan masters were, it's important for them to be able to distinguish between proper tenet systems and those that just appear as though they were proper. So for those who are intelligent, they, without having to look outside of this system, they make an effort in, it's logical or right to make an effort in hearing and thinking and so forth. So in the same way that Je Rinpoche himself first sought out many different teachings, sought out many hearing of many teachings, and then contemplated their meaning such that they then eventually arose as personal instructions and then went and actually put them into practice. Those who are intelligent should follow that same sort of path of trying to seek out a lot of hearing of the teachings and then engage in reflection and study such that you're then able to meditate on the various points, see how they are personal instructions. And many of the earlier Tibetan masters were unable to properly distinguish between those tenet systems that were properly laid out and those that are merely sort of semblances of a proper tenet system. And so for those who are wishing to or those who are intelligent, they should, without having to look to sort of outsider systems, make an effort at hearing and reflecting and so forth.
Oh yeah. 같이写了下家园的领导之上嘛，我也看我大家看几天你都得了，现在在写下没吧？来了，这些个有没把当？他们这些个这些个有没把有那点把出，点把出跑这些个有没把当？现在是把当结巴给大把马去完了，说吧他没地方的忙不起他有说呀，是把当结巴给大把马去完了，说他我一看我在那推几年我看我在那给马去吧，
So many of the earlier masters within Tibet did not know how to identify a proper object or find something or be able to use logic and reasoning properly in order to come to the kind of proper conclusions. So they might, these are explained within Je Rinpoche's Essence of Good Explanations, how some scholars were unable to posit an object properly, posit something without having true existence, or they were unable to use logic and reasoning and so forth in a proper way. So there are many sort of examples of this, but understanding how to properly approach the material and work with it is very important.
Oh yeah, that did the match. That in it, that you are never corner tended to Juba Jubala, Dambala, and Lundoji Dambani Yabainza, Toby Damba tended to Jungos Jubatan, Lunga Damba churches, then tended to Jungos Jubatan. Quinzen Tena. Ane tamba zimbala drozo, tande ku chungo yenzang, ane tamba zimbala drozo da sumu yeba yenzang. Tambo ta, tobi, kasore, tobi tamba tande chi chungo su chuba tela. Tadi, tande dewa korang la, dumbi nang la, tande xeba tang. 가서 또면나 또비나나 던져도 시험나나 던지 시험이 지대한다나 교육 안 보지 표준 레바 최저 현도 민리 세다 뒤말이 되니 가서래서 뜸비 나네 땡데 떠바다서 두자라 랑도 뜸비 나네 랑도 지네 치지 말고 뜸비 나네 땡데지 태권이 뜸바데 뜸바탕스 어 대초라 뜸비 나네 땡데 떠바다 대초래 아니 두자 남지 같이 시지나 망보지와 레데 셰럽게 나네 시지나라 망보지 나위베 나네 망보지 예비 시비 셰럽게 나네 셰럽 초도 주와데 가르레잖아 아니 땡지 대화 좀 태권하니 시와더니 어떤 거 가서가 조금만 좀 안에 민게 따빠 잠시 땡지 시와더니 너무 땡중 것도 시와더니 시원 되니 지대나 저요 아무 무슨 참바 디 체세 아니 디나 시구 트된 디나네 아니 미셔와다 그바다한테 뭐 탐제래 아니 저요 지대니 저어도 부도 좀 대신도 어느 다 여기야 좀 된데 최송바나 이게 나네 땡데 최송바 대당 시럽게 나나야 아니 땡데 시바니 부도 좀 임바대 부진 라바디 임바 아니 좀 내내 체란 그 말에 저 코나 체인지 시에 무디 최소지 미시데 미시그 말에 다야 되고
So here, then it turns to the next point, which is establishing that only these teachings are the entryway for those seeking liberation. And so the teachings themselves are divided, the Dharma, into the teachings of realizations and those of scripture. So here, first, it establishes that the teachings of realizations are established as the entryway for those wishing liberation. And then secondly, it establishes that the scripture, the teaching of the scriptures, is also the entryway for those wishing liberation. And so, therefore, for those reasons, then why or how one goes about giving rise to joy for those who hold the teachings, for those who carry on the teachings. And so, this then leads into verse 37, wherein Je Rinpoche says, "Amongst teachers, the teacher of dependent origination, amongst wisdoms, the knowledge of dependent origination. You, who are most excellent like the kings in the world, know this perfectly well, not others." So here, Je Lama Tsongkhapa is referring to the Buddha as being the supreme among teachers for his teaching on dependent origination. And this wisdom of dependent origination is also praised as supreme. So here, as far as the meaning of this verse 37, it says, so you who teach dependent origination, so among all of the teachers, only you are supreme, for you teach the disciples, those who are to be tamed, what it is that should be taken up and what it is that should be abandoned. And so only you are really a teacher, or you are the supreme teacher. And among all of the different types of wisdom, only this wisdom of dependent origination, these are like the kings of the world, or the superior masters of the world. You are able to overcome all of those sort of haughty, arrogant others in order, and you saw directly this way of dependent origination. And so only you know this, referring again to the Buddha, not any other sort of non-Buddhist teachers were able to realize this truth of dependent origination. So here again, this teaching of dependent origination is praised as supreme, as well as the wisdom which recognizes that although things lack intrinsic existence, they are merely nominally existent or merely designated. So these are being praised as supreme to anyone else within the world. No other non-Buddhist is able to know this kind of knowledge of the Buddha.
Oh yeah. 就可能前几先目的是说这个没写的，아니 시 구비 자와 다요 구바 탐제 그 자와 시내가 송관장 알아서 좋아남지 아니 좋아남라 아니 구바 탐제 그 자와 가르래잖아 아니 딘딘 가서래 riba midi cho riba yishi ki midi cho riba yuden ji riba yishi doni do riba la sha ne ti midi cho de la ma riba si go de za denzi ji ma riba she ne我到古巴咱这去找啊，空对啊，西双，几天古巴企业吧，他找啊买的是，等着这把过来去双，你跟他一找啊，你天上就做大了就他妈的是，我他妈的把这送双，我天在边买的把这些呢，你认真台长。这爬架上去提一下，被爬架的来写的什么钱？这爬架上去吧，帮别这步。你跟赛的原来跟着吧，是跟我在的马里巴当提一下被爬架当接吧，你们把这西直把他们去爬塞巴当。原来你帮多就原来跟着吧，是吧？帮多就原来跟着当。我听呢，天这位帮多就原来你不得 top 几个，帮把他多比原来 top 几个让。你看说他是数据牛的，咱跟世界上，你多把可能空都拍些个，特别是咱跟世界上，他是数据是我多把，他是数据给数据牛的，却可能才就一笔写的，多把可能才就一笔写的是，
So, here, only the Buddha knows this teaching properly, has this proper wisdom. Other non-Buddhists do not. And it continues saying that the Buddha, knowing that the root of all degenerations, all bad things, which is sort of the foundation, is this ignorance grasping at true existence, then he sees that is what needs to be abandoned. So in Praise of Dependent Origination itself said earlier, whatever degenerations there are in the world, the root of all these is ignorance. So the Buddha has come to recognize that whatever sort of bad things there are in the world, the cause of all of this is grasping at true existence, this ignorance which grasps at true existence. And the opposite of that, the wisdom which recognizes that the objects, phenomena are not truly existent, is the kind of proper wisdom, the cultivation of which will be able to overcome this ignorance, be able to have the force to abandon ignorance together with its latencies, its imprints, or those kind of predispositions of ignorance. And so the Buddha has completely actualized this result of abandoning that ignorance and perfecting all qualities, removing all faults and perfecting all qualities. And so as far as all of the faults that the Buddha has overcome, this is any kind of ignorance together with the seeds or the imprints of that ignorance. And it is by practicing the path which is a union of wisdom and method, that the Buddha is then able to eliminate all faults and perfect all qualities. And this is a particular quality of the Buddha alone. This is something that only the Buddha has realized. So again, this at the point of the foundation, one needs to understand what the root of samsara is, how one goes about abandoning that ignorance together with its imprints, and it is by the unified path of wisdom and method, which is unique to the Buddha, that one is then able to overcome all faults and obtain all good qualities.
Oh yeah. 那这把写了呢，第三堂呢，就用普军联把切先都没啥钱，那第一节了，但把谈的就中国是主把台了，今天的就弄个单把，他今天多别单把谈的中国是钱，他今天的就弄个单把谈的就中国是主把了，那今天的看着我77年干啥我单这年了，咱们这就，天安两岸大街是习近平在全了民。现在他说话直接就不听吧的，是吧？我就看着也是，专门的去，你到长春当那点，这期间都开了人不容我们，俺那样的这期间开没用完了，长安街， 야나 군조 뭐된 군조 땡지做前的电报的传到电机做前报的电他长黑我那时候个长黑听吧的是吧院长话说的就确实新年干杂哇是今年的确实长黑几多新年就干杂哇他们这是你他我当举比我是安尼就当把你我是到比起的电报的都在这个我是安尼我是电那电都没容易安尼都在我是啦安尼他说的我是电那切到了送完了说吧给你话原件给都在我是啦安尼举比过呢我提当把你了举比安尼举比差不多过呢安尼我等着你了怎么的等着你了就行是等着你了怎么的是这样看上我们他把那些钱呢就叫我们了安尼等着大把等着对美女吧安尼举件来对我的切下来对我了说吧他举比过呢安尼等着大把东西等着这里呀多把它吃不起头是吧我当举比过呢等着你了怎么的等着你了安尼就行等着你了就行我等着说安尼看中间的安尼如果去说长个去了说吧他不是送把太阳安尼国外的客人啥呢安尼这把出来嘛喷的这把出来是不马英吧安尼都是你们比两个人在一起演技如果差了几位就把马英吧给安尼中间的有国松这把看上去了有嘛的是呀
So then the next point is establishing that the teachings of the scriptures are the entryway for those wishing for liberation. So again, among the teachings, there are the teachings of realizations and the teaching of scripture. And so here, this comes then in verse 38, where it says that all that you have taught proceeds by way of dependent origination. That too is done for the sake of nirvana. You have no deeds that do not bring peace. So here it says the Buddha, the Bhagavan, you taught, and as it appears within the sutras, which are definitive and those which require interpretation. So again, there is a way of understanding the various teachings of the Buddha. Some say that if they can be accepted literally, then they are definitive, and if not, then they require interpretation. The actual sort of way of distinguishing between that which is needing interpretation and that which is definitive is to look at its main subject matter, whether it is mainly teaching the conventional truth or focusing on ultimate truth. But so all of the scriptures, whatever scriptures there are of the Buddha, all of this teaches is for the sake of teaching dependent origination, whether that is directly teaching dependent origination or by implication, sort of indirectly teaching dependent origination. Now this depends upon the disciples that are being taught. For those sort of lesser disciples where there is a danger of falling into an extreme of annihilation, of nihilism, then they are not initially taught that things are designatedly, dependently existent, but rather they're taught that things rely upon causes and conditions. And in that way, once they are able to not fall into an extreme of nihilism, they are then led to the proper understanding. But in accordance with the needs and sort of dispositions of disciples, the Buddha sometimes teaches emptiness directly and sometimes has to lead them through other means in order to come to the proper understanding. So the reason for teaching dependent origination, for engaging with that, is very important. There's a special purpose to this. He has done this for a purpose, but it's not just in order to sort of take up debate. It's not for the purpose of just debating things, but rather it's in order that disciples be able to achieve a state of freedom, a state of nirvana from their afflictions. And so all of the teachings of the Buddha are for the sake of peace. There are none that are not taught for the sake of pacifying subtle and coarse suffering and the origin of suffering. That's referring to the first two truths. And so the Buddha, all of the actions of the Buddha through the three doors are for that sake. There is no sort of action of the Buddha which is not for the sake of helping to pacify the suffering of disciples.
Oh yeah, more than you be gonna attend in la tam de soin de. Junju Gasuya, Yaladita Tamjani, to be share of turn to song, Jim then the Jiso, Tamonga Sumbala Sawakis, and a soon to Teta, Dombani Tobi, and a share of Tobi, Donny Tobi share of and a give it to the song. And it has Yagi Kare, Yagi Leshan Bukola, Dotanga, Lord made it Hamaso. Teta Tujing of it, Tabzuda, Ribajada, Kin, Zubaze, Siriga, Tambode. 아니 남다 고수 동바시와 제와 매비수 미시반이 저와 참주바 동바 남바도 고수도 마시바라 때네 아니 치질로도 된진티 왕게 차단 모습 거 레탄에 아니 코와 고수 그런 바도 마소니 저 어쩌다 어디다다 동아 자원은 제제대 돈이도 비셔라 인장 아니 돈이 싫어라 아니 균에 장야대 대다 투쟁아 왜 참조장 리바자다 그 요거는 아니 사무 동반이 혼자 집을 잡아 내 가산에 라이마
So, as it says in the at the beginning of the 9th chapter of Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, speaking about the teachings of the other perfections, he says that all of these other branches or parts were taught for the sake of wisdom. So all of the teachings of the Buddha were taught ultimately for the sake of being able to realize this wisdom realizing emptiness. And so again, there are other texts like Likshe Nyingpo and so forth that show that lay out how it is that the Buddha leads disciples in the proper way in order to show them to the wisdom realizing emptiness. So by showing the stages of how one cycles in samsara, how it is that this ignorance grasping at true existence causes one to then create karma, and that karma leaves imprints on the consciousness which then ripen in future lives, and one is stuck cycling in samsara. And so by showing that it is this wisdom realizing emptiness, that recognizing the lack of true existence of phenomena is the antidote to that fundamental cause of samsara, then all of the teachings, all of the various reasonings and so forth that the Buddha lays out are for the sake of being able to lead disciples to that understanding.
Oh yeah, 대제라 아니다. 땡땡이라 조진 괴바양 저바 술래마 마인바. 서다 현지 저바 술래마 마인바. 오만 주발을 소반하신. 땡주 레제 저라 차베시 만제. 남로치나 ten이된 세가라. 저바라 차베치도 아니 저바자 말에서. 저바 저니 아니 태고나니 땡라 팝데 아니 태고말라 땡나 넘버 2와 콜라 초비 초와 토비치도 송바레서가 오스만나지 저바양 흘레 많이 봐서 땡주에 저라 차베자 마자 남도 치나 ten이 땡세오 태고나니 땡 저바 말에서 뭐 디송에 봐 저바 흘레 많이 봐서 노자니 몸비 양알랜 대가이 야와 치이지 다 누군 다를 가서 쉬어야 봐. 지당 누군당. 안에도 가서 누군 참모스나 다 동안도 마찬가지다 말해. 아니 내년이 겨와 밤에 가사대라. 아니 말이 바자 그 사이라고 왕기. 아니 시리그 저와 참모다 말이 바자 그 사이 왕기. 아니 삼촌이 겨와 내 된줄라. 아니 누군 차와시고 더서 쉬어야 봐. 누군 차와. 겨와 내지그 두더라 군정체. 안에 삼신이 깨와람바게 안에 수대 통보되라 안에 가사를 차위 동화대마 수동화대마 많이 받체
동안도만 받대 correct.
이 개와 렌즈들라 산이 요 가서 라이바 가이세나 니모 마방 봐도 니모 왕그 렌이 왕그 찍으러 와.
네.
와. 다사 듬바다녀랑 다좀 받든지 니모 강가 빠타래. 다 개와 렌거 와래. 개와 렌도 가르래서나 아니 말이 바자가 사다 사매게 내라다네 개와 렌거 와라. 어참 말이 바자가 사나 사매게 내야돼 군중 차와체.
No.
뒤랑비 안에서 개와디 풍보디 안두된 차와체.
No. So here, then it says that the purpose of teaching dependent origination was not for engaging in debate. So this is also expressed in Chandrakirti's Entry to the Middle Way, where he says that the Buddha taught these things not out of attachment to like winning in debate, but rather for the liberation of disciples. So all of these things are taught for the sake of liberating disciples, of helping them to get out of samsara. It's not that the Buddha is teaching all of these various reasonings only to win a debate or to best others somehow, but rather this is for the purpose of liberating disciples. And so here, where it says that all of these, there are no sort of deeds of the Buddha of the three doors that are not done for the sake of pacifying coarse and subtle suffering and the origin of suffering. So here the more coarse form of the truth of suffering and the origin of suffering is referring to this ignorance, grasping at things as being real, and then accumulating karma and having to take up the contaminated aggregates due to that contaminated karma and so forth. Now, for a bodhisattva, someone who has reached like the seventh ground and has gotten rid of all of the manifest ignorance and so forth, but yet still has a subtle uncontaminated karma that causes them to take rebirth still. They are merely forced to take rebirth due to having the imprints, the kind of latencies of ignorance. This is what is being referred to by the subtle origin of suffering here, because those who have not yet fully liberated themselves, fully gotten rid of all of the obscurations to omniscience, they still are taking rebirth due to uncontaminated karma. So that's what is being referred to as this subtle suffering and then the origin of suffering.
Oh yeah, that didn't she was that didn't danger boy shit and danger tang. Do the Shanamji, Shanam, and it only you don't need Dobaki, and it give me to you. So that boy shit and said the budget injuries and what. And you can't see the church and nutrition. Consume good and more bunches. She pioneered the market, Zabaka, Teva Transonga, she chibi long, sending Giore. 산재기 까이라 체주 시단다 뭐 고그레스.
No.
저 체주 시단다 봐. 저저 토리다 타바 그 연단다 봐.
No.
아니 저지 측이 견 타다 단차와.
그래.
아니 제래라. 아니 감숨지 뭐도 반자 지를 본지 숨바 체주 시지어래. 그래서
숨바디 카르레스.
저자당 토리다 타바 이 지는 지인지.
No.
여자 토리다 타바소지 연단다 봐 이세. 저지 측이 견타다는 저 숨바대 체.
그래.
저지 측이 견타다 단차.
아니 감송기 뉴몬 방화.
감송기 뉴몬 지르바 본지도 숨바세. 강식 된대 최단 예제시. 감송군라 뉴몬 반지 본지도 시 판연도 봐 잡아강. 아니 탈부 판연도 맞으나. 아니 야기 당번이오데 찍도다나. 아니 동안여와 시위녀와 시가 그 판연도 봐. 시오티 제로와. 다든지 이제 대보와 시대 주체 해야 되라서.
So here then it lists out a variety of other topics that you're going to need to study elsewhere. But here it says then, the way that a treatise is endowed with the four confidences, as well as how it is that other texts, other sutras and so forth, ripen the mind for emptiness. And then it will continue into the way in which the lower tenet schools are like a staircase leading to the higher ones. So here where it says that the way that a treatise is endowed with the four sort of confidences. This is referring to the fact that a treatise, in order to be something that you would have confidence in, needs to have four sort of qualifications. And first is that it accords with the four seals of Buddhism, that it has that kind of framework. And secondly, that it teaches the qualities of liberation and omniscience, so it is for the purpose of gaining liberation and omniscience. And then third is that it's completely free of any sort of fault in the words. There's no error there. And then that it is taught in order to abandon the afflictions of the three realms. So here it is taught for that sake of gaining liberation. So these are probably the four sort of confidences that one needs to have in a treatise.
哦呀，那多这些呢，东西就民间都引出，他在基本上是白的啊。哦，他妈，俺那卡说的，彻底了些，俺那卡说的就穷个过单，是吧？但呢，就整个过单。但呢，就整个过单呢，真的呀，俺那根明白切，俺那就整个汤包给，俺那就穷告诉，俺那根明白切，就整个告诉当把你担把过，担把了担了，夸了超完些吧，是吧？俺那夸了车位去头，俺那提前进来么就把切把那说话，我多这些呢，当你就根本就都引出场，
So here then, where it says the way in which or sort of how other sutras are for ripening the continuum for emptiness. So here, this is again referring to sort of the stages of the path, how one proceeds first by training the mind in the trainings for the being of small capacity, the fearing the lower realms and so forth, and turning away from this life, and then how one proceeds to the stages of training the mind for the being of middling capacity, turning away from all of samsara, wishing to gain liberation and so forth, the kind of contemplations that one goes through to gain renunciation, and then how one eventually turns to the Mahayana and enters into the Mahayana. These would be included within the stages of ripening one's continuum to then be able to eventually realize emptiness. So here where it says how other scriptures, how other sutras are able to ripen the mind, this is what it's referring to, how one progresses through the stages of the path.
Oh yeah, that didn't come down. I met our Kwama, but to Sudrovi, so say, and the Tambo, and the Cheramala. 大起来往前就当把单了跑，大起来往前打看干呢，俺那大起来往前当把单了跑，但那呀，留下老爷讲的怎么，俺那老家完了，俺那大起来往前是当被顶住，俺那看啥人家就在人家特别在一个出来当把当把，在一个出把干把个，人家特别在一个当把，我们这边给看啥个当把什么的单。 是吧？但那呀，其实干了，俺那前多年了，但没那把个，俺那缺一大没得，俺那现在被那个说，甚至在线都搞不得了，缺一大没是单呢，俺那缺一大没啥不单。但呢，俺那他就让就把了，哦，干啥的？你告诉，俺那。 店主干把个现在把店主，甚至在线个这边当把店主给我的，人家俺那当把店主干其他那个吃呢，让心就团那把当兵， 다와 추가 동바기 아니 란지비리 지다와라 칠 타를 안에서 가르라서나 쳐담제 라완도 추바게 아니 단규비 다와라야 체도시 이장 다와 고마 오미 다와 고마 고미 밥대수 조조조이 추당
이네 제자마와디
제자마 다치 라완지 동바
랑야 두바 제이기 동바디 켈랭이 말베 랑야 두
도대와라
No. Okay. So, here then, where it says the way that then one progresses along the various tenant schools, sort of going from the view of the lesser, the lower ones, to the higher ones is almost like a staircase. So here, one proceeds through the various tenant schools by coming to understand the kind of selflessness that they assert, and refining that view as one goes through the various stages. So first, the Great Exposition School, or the Vaibhashikas, the selflessness that they accept is they refute a self which is permanent, unitary, and autonomous. So for them, that is the kind of selflessness that they accept. Now the Sutra School then refines that, or takes that a little bit farther, and they refute a self which is a self-sufficient, substantial entity. And so both the Vaibhashikas and the Sutra School, they only accept the selflessness of the person. So both of these are just in relation to the person, not to all phenomena. And so then when one graduates to the mind-only school, then one gets a sense of what the selflessness of phenomena is, and the initial sort of positing of that as referring to the emptiness of being a different substantial entity from the perceiving consciousness. So for the mind-only school, they accept a level of the selflessness of phenomena. And then by the time that one progresses to the middle way autonomy school, here they would argue that ultimately things don't have some kind of true existence, although they do have intrinsic existence and so forth. This is the kind of understanding that comes from the autonomy school. And then finally one proceeds to the pinnacle, the prasangika, or the consequentialist school, where even conventionally things don't have some kind of intrinsic existence. There's no true existence accepted by those schools. Now the autonomy school also does not accept some kind of true existence, although the mind-only school would posit that the mind is truly existent and so forth. So in this way, one proceeds through the various tenant schools in such a way as to sort of almost like a staircase, building up and coming to a more refined understanding.
Oh yeah, that didn't teach la kolosum jitan. Tuba soche tatu namni. Ane xianla xiewa chao song da xianla xiewa chao kolosum sena that did kolo tambo. Kolo tambo deshi kolo, jumdene tambo ju sangjene so deshi kolo. Niwa chanyi me bi kolo chiongo. Ane sumba kaso ren dodo gongde che. 我推送不这个，俺那长短当那点开吧，多的我这个可了谈不，俺那那点就多的，可了盘他拍起开那个嘛的，提起多开那个嘛的，是吧？现在我大不一样，俺那可了谈不你长短的，他们那点都得着。我们欧嘛我这不一样，俺那可了谈不当，他们你我的长短当，爸爸那点就得。 你他让就把人家爸爸来呀，唱那个千女乐的对象，说他听这个，他就把人家他爸爸我点来我点一边唱啊，他听这个他做出就是习惯的。啊，我说。
랑규박이 디
랑규박이 아니 콜로爸爸来呀，唱那个千女乐吧。
唱아니 당보단 타마.
당보단 타마라 장전기 도 장전기 도 연구와. 그래서 sem전부에 당보니 장전 다 타망을 된대. 그래서 어제
And then it continues saying then also the way in which the various tenant schools define or lay out the meaning of the three turnings of the wheel. This is also something that you should know elsewhere, but just to give a brief kind of presentation of this. So these three turnings of the wheel are usually the way that they are laid out is from the Sutra Unraveling the Thought, or Unraveling the Intention of the Buddha. And the first wheel is considered to be the teachings on the Four Noble Truths. And then the second wheel is the sort of Arya or superior wheel, also referred to as the teaching of signlessness. And then finally, the final wheel is considered to be the Sutra Unraveling the Thought itself, and other such sutras. So here, like for example, the Sutra school, the Sautrantikas, they do not accept the second and third wheel. They only accept the teachings of the Four Noble Truths. They're not a Mahayana school, so they don't accept the sutras that come after that. Now, the mind-only school, accepting the presentation that comes in the Sutra Unraveling the Thought, they assert that the first two turnings of the wheel are considered to be requiring interpretation, and the final turning of the wheel, as it's expressed in the Sutra Unraveling the Thought, is considered to be definitive. Now, for the Middle Way Autonomy School, they say that the first turning as well as the last turning are requiring interpretation, and the middle turning of the wheel, that of the signlessness and so forth, has parts that are definitive and then parts that require interpretation as well. Now, the Prasangika school asserts that the first and the final wheel require interpretation, and the middle turning, that of the perfection of wisdom and so forth, are to be considered definitive. But these are things that one can know from elsewhere.
Oh yeah, that is that's what Tena Temba Junzen Tenas, and it will be Temba, and it had a longer Temba, Tobisam was it, and it turned up the Jungos Jumni. Jungos called the Duptum, Jungo in Junzen Tena. That Temba Timbala job is through the two careers, and Demo Cheki Tembani, Kangan Nava Lansumba. Teta Tamje Shiji, Chedan Zimba Sumugu said that the 16 body. I tell myself, then was a bit check. Only Church Dambani is a Gana Jim then the Church, and it's that Kondia, she senior Kata, what then in the Tana Juk, Suana Sinchene, Churtamje, don't not castle him, don't see Nawata, Nancy Tomba. That turned out, oh, that Tobet Tatum detended and a time, and it she gets soon be lungi Dambani. That Kolo Kolo Papa, she gets to be Lungi Dambani, that only them be Lungetala, Lungi Dambani, and it you can't get Nayu Lams, do you can't get Nayu Lams, so what, Tata Tamja, and Tatter, and Shiva, Tabandovi Chedu, and Damba Zimbala, when they're switching me with the Kuajuro. Yeah.
So then the next point is that therefore, so based upon having established that the teachings on, or the teachings of realizations are the entryway for those wishing for liberation, as well as the teachings of scripture are also established as being the entryway for those wishing for liberation. So then therefore, for those reasons, how one goes about giving rise to joy for those who hold the teachings. And so this comes in verse 39. Where he says, "Alas, your teaching is such, in whoever's ears it falls, they all attain peace. So who would not be honored to uphold your teaching?" So here, actually, and then it'll come, the next verse as well comes under this point. But here it says then, Buddha, Bhagavan, all of your teachings are, you taught for the sake of dependent origination, or for the sake of liberating beings. But here, this teaching that the Buddha has given, that although things appear, they are empty, and although they are empty, they appear, this teaching of dependent origination origination and emptiness is, as it appears in, for example, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. All of this is taught for the sake of peace, of bringing disciples to peace. So here it says then, whoever's ears this falls on, whoever is lucky enough to be able to hear these teachings, this is all taught for the sake of leading them all to peace, ultimately to peace. So who then would not, who is intelligent, would not give rise to respect for those then who hold the teachings, who uphold these teachings? One should give rise to respect for those.
Oh yeah, 여기 가르쳐 오래서다 시주 숨바지 점원 체지다만 강근나와 랑숨바 대다 탐제 시주지 있어야 돼요. 아니 좀 된데 아니 가서 다 가사가 다 해봐 숨바 그러와 가서 저 저와도 가사가 다 해봐 숨바 그러와 가사가 다 해봐 맞잖아. 아니 거의 두개와 차와라 때는 더 대화 총하다 유미게 와라 때는 더 대화 생활돼 아니 저 모두 왔더라 가사가 다 연나 아니 좀 아니 다음에는 때는 렌게 매번 그 가사 때라 내가 다음에는 TV치도 다 해봐서 단 말이야 그래와 자고시 이제 다 해주지 다음에 제장 때 뭐줄 전에 자와시라 소원하시 담보들라 다때 대니 다 대니 갈리 아니 다음에라야 티바 치고 인자 아니 어때다 순도 두탄 되는 다 고시자 인자 가서 정말 나시 전에 가서래 손은 민배 최디라 태좀 사월 민주지 태좀 사월 잠재지 시바스월 쳐바치로서 가서 시작을 못해서
No.
어, 손은 민바기 다开랭게 남에라 태좀 자서 그 말에 와 가지 태좀 사나야 아니 시바스 코와라 아니 바 세버리 그 파티 시비스 시바스볼 쳐바치고 그래 어 대송하나 제전에 다 지단 도시인 바 도리치 최지단 바데 원내 소식이 미그데 아니 그와 주로 야
No. So whoever then hears these teachings, in whoever's ears it falls, they all attain peace. So who would not be sort of honored, or who would not give respect to those who uphold these teachings? So here again, the Buddha taught in such a way as to lead disciples as per their disposition and their needs. So for those who if they were not taught that a self existed, they would not be able to accept karma. They wouldn't see how there could be effects arising from causes if there were not a self posited. So for these individuals, without positing the existence of a self, they wouldn't know how to understand the accumulation of karma, the ripening of karma, how a virtuous activity would lead to a happy result and a non-virtuous activity leading to suffering. So for those who would fall into a nihilistic kind of a view, the Buddha initially taught that there was a self. So this is also explained within Nagarjuna's root verses on wisdom, where he has a line saying that a verse saying that the Buddha initially taught a self, and then he led beings to understand selflessness. So first he taught a self in order to avoid having those disciples fall into an extreme of nihilism where they're denying karma, and then proceeded to lead them to the understanding of selflessness. And so here, as we saw in the verse from 400 verses by Aryadeva quoted last time, that those of little merit don't even give rise to doubt. So those who have little merit don't even sort of have a doubt about whether or not things are as they appear. They just accept them as they appear. But for those who even just have a little bit of doubt, that will tear samsara to shreds. So for them, just beginning to have some kind of a doubt about this is how we begin the path, and then are able to proceed all the way to Buddhahood. So, but the teachings proceed in such a way as to fit with the dispositions of disciples. So for those who could not initially accept an idea of selflessness, they were taught that there is a self, and then are slowly led into the kind of reasoning of selflessness and so forth. But all of the Buddha's teachings are for leading beings to peace, but there are sort of skillful means for doing that.
Oh yeah, tender we casa della da kai lenga della ani da me ne ba ni jin ne da den ba de da pen to wa yin de cho le chen ni song gua de za wa xie le ge da gu xie jiang den ju da me ji jiang shen de liang ba san jian nam ji da ne da me ga me jie jiang de song dang ani le xie ni bo la le jie da me ba den ba ni jin ne a ma cho de song ba xin no so ko che da le me dong me ge wa yi wa yin zang an ti le.
No. So it's taught that there is a purpose for initially teaching that there is a self. So there's a verse from Nagarjuna's Root Verses on Wisdom where he says that then first it is taught that there is a self, and then beings are led to understand selflessness. And it is because those beings might fall into an extreme of nihilism that they are first taught that there is a self. This is also expressed in Lekshe Ningpo, of how it's important to lead disciples properly, such that they first come to accept a self, so they don't deny karma and so forth, and then eventually they are able to be led to an understanding of selflessness.
Oh yeah, that is ni wa de la ani phe go ta da jiang ba da dao ga di dong ba da ju ge tian ni de che ba lu de ko zhuo pe se da de yin ba ci jian ni tian de na ani ye yu an bo xin du ani pe ji go wa ta da pa ro ba ge ani go wa ta da zhong xin ani zhong dian de ji pe go ta da ba zhong xin si ji na ba tang 배고 타다 점바당 따오 가디 동바당 살아가라 아니 장애지 도되남 그와 점된지 장애지 도되나라 아니 가서래 내가 춥송하다 내가 마주송하다 아니 치료 텐도 춥송하다 치료 텐도 마주생다 장전당 거에 망보지 요아 인자 아니 텐데 간 텐조잖아 장애 숨바데 아니 두자라 때네 다시 시원하시 나 여바던 바데 점된데 그라신 바 두지 뭐 인자 나 여바던 바데 장전 아니 그 바바당 담보라서 가라 나 매바 숨바데 아니 가서래 두지 로제 다서 바 다음에 되라 아니 두자기 로에 삼바다 tum바데 그 다음에 요아 인자 고와 요와 인상 장애지 또 남데 따오데 또 공호승바데 가지 당바 간디 당바 베나 아니 콜라 담보니라는 거 찬이 콜라 담보다 아니 타만이라는 거 찬이 주어승바다 바바라는 거 찬이지 마주바 승보데 맹가와 담보도 도대위라 도대위 도시 삼바라 때나 송하다 타민내가서 송바데 도대선자 도시 삼점바라 때에 송바다 뭐에서 뭐된데 탄유와라 때나 송바 어딘저기 어느 따오 가디 동바다 야 아니 대자의 점된데지 송 나위 남도 송와 점지 아니 끼고 세나 아니 sem장기와 먼저 아니 사담이 대화 토야다 내리 지 뒤니 내리 타바다 탐제 첨바니 니삼 야나 추구다 수구 뒤니 내리 타바다 탐제 내리 타바다 내리 온도다 내리 삼 야나 추구다 수구 뒤니 데라도 대화 제바기 아니 좀 된데기 아니 루데라 코 좋아 치제 페시위 되리
So here then it continues saying in the next verse, so this is verse 40, it overcomes all opposing challenges, it is free from contradictions between earlier and latter parts, it grants fulfillment of being's two aims. For this system, my joy increases evermore. So here again, the Buddha taught in such a way as to appeal to to the dispositions, the needs of disciples. He taught with skillful means in order to teach and lead disciples in accordance with their own sort of thought, in accordance with the way that they needed. So here, like a sort of master of all kings, the Buddha overcomes, outshines all sort of opposing challenges, anyone who would oppose or try to challenge him. And so here he teaches in the various scriptures that are definitive and those requiring interpretation. So again, although it may appear as though there is some sort of contradiction between earlier and latter parts, these are really all taught for the sake of working with beings' minds, to teach in accordance with the thoughts and needs of beings. So, for example, the Buddha initially, in the first turning of the wheel, taught that there was a self, and then in the second turning, in the Arya turning of the wheel, taught that there was no self, and so forth. He's taught in some places that external objects are established, and in the mind-only kind of teachings, showing that external objects are not established as such. And so these are all taught in accordance with the needs of beings, of disciples. So again, for example, in the first turning of the wheel as well as the last turning of the wheel, the Buddha taught that all phenomena are existent, established by means of their own characteristics, whereas the actual sort of truth, the actual nature of things is such that they are free from any kind of existence by means of their own characteristics, as it is expressed in the second turning of the wheel. But the reason that he taught these various teachings was in accordance with the needs of disciples. So there's no contradiction between them, but rather it's a display of skillful means, and one needs to understand properly what is to be taken definitively and what requires interpretation. So here, when one sees that these are not, there's no contradiction between earlier and latter parts, but rather these are all sort of expedient means to liberate disciples. These teachings, just by merely hearing them, they bring to beings, they easily give to beings the higher realms, so taking a good rebirth as a human or a god, as well as the definitive goodness of the two aims, accomplishing the truth body and the form body of the Buddhas. So here, this is the sort of way in which the Buddha has taught, and teaching in this way is easily able to give to beings these two aims. And so his joy, Je Lama Tsongkhapa's joy, increases more and more thinking about this.
Oh yeah, that didn't. Ne di da ko shi do nyong sen se de ne ko do sha ba ge ane jam den de ji o chang de dang ge de song ba ta da gang du min zha wa min ga wa ge ne dang ane ka so de da da ju ge ti ni wo do dang le sam chi su gu gu ane jam de ge song la ta sam la chen che son cha wa la de la do da wa cha ba ge oni ta ne ta da ko shi do nyong sen 레버 코나 안쪽 폐화시 연구와 온 샤바다 폐화시 온와데 달라른 처먹이 와데 바깥지 수수 잡아지라 두스데 송아래 라 자주 라르네 딘데 나죠 저나 퇴화 용세 아예 다다위 퇴지 아니 가서 나저 냠술렘 레네 아니 냠술 나저 냠술렘 발라 좀 받쳐게 와 나저를 세들 다장 sem나만 저 같은 거잖아 거예요 다 마보요 와 남저 쟤는 아니 전저 띵게 냠술렘 같이 이나야 퇴와 용와다 띵게 냠술렘이야 냠술렘 지그 내데 기타 와시도 마셔봐 그 퇴와 용와다 만도 퇴장, 소만도 퇴장, 야, 냠에 냠수 렘바 그날라 막해봐. 퇴장 담서 sonde 냠수 나와 그날라 막해봐다. 메가신 파제 소랍다라 초리 메서 파 어텐라베게 안는 안joa 파제제 애니 소랍제 떠와라 초리 메 세가 가시 띵에서 공부할까요? 퇴삼라 텐데 미셔봐. 아이 가시 퇴삼라야 배서 지나야 띵에서 공부하면 아니 배서 미셔봐게. 아니 미 초래 상황 수업 따와라 초래 미도 상황. 我听着我听到了，俺那这位孙子听到，俺那光子下巴给，这把那这孙他比里边给，咱们那店呢，俺那孙子就天下巴给吐没呗，俺那店比吐没巴给卡萨太太给，俺那中间的去龙多去店比那么左边，俺那大把桥。 那么错，可说开完节吧，那么开完节吧的时候，那么俺那查话的讲过那么中国去比谁呢？是，俺那我听谁呢？俺他太大了，出这话准备过年新的准备路，俺那长安个出，俺都没做完他，说话他真正准备出的嘛，先把人送过来，他俺都没做完他，到我感觉当把他就给天爷得罪了，说话，俺那他听说好的话，新的准备路的钱吧，大概人工作做就是先送把大了，是呀。
lamram chamonero.
lamram chamonero, 直接，个我直接，
So here then coming to understand the way in which the teachings are not contradictory, there's no contradiction between earlier and latter parts, and understanding how it is that certain scriptures, how it is that we should identify and understand scripture, so being able to distinguish between that which is definitive and that which requires interpretation, and being able to then come and understand how it is that these teachings accomplish the aims of beings. So here, this is sort of very briefly presented, but if you understand this well, then your joy will increase more and more. These are very essential points to understand how to interpret Scripture properly, as well as how to come to view it as not having any kind of contradiction, and understanding how it is that this is able to accomplish the aims of beings. So here in this sort of versified versification from the great stages of the path by Jelamon Tsongkhapa. Here there is a verse which says that so these days those who make effort as yogis have little learning. So those who are trying to make some kind of effort at gaining meditative concentration or some kind of meditative stabilization don't have extensive learning. They tend to just have very little kind of understanding. And those that do have a lot of learning tend to not be expert in the actual points of practice. So even someone who has heard a lot of teachings, they tend to not understand how to actually put those points into practice, or what are the essential points of practice. And generally, these beings tend to look at the teachings with sort of partisan eyes, or partial. They're only looking at part of the teachings. So those who are interested in really improving their meditative stabilization, they're only looking at those particular trainings. They're not looking at, say, ethics or the wisdom realizing emptiness. And so the way that disciples look at the scriptures is sort of only partial. And these beings also lack the power to be able to distinguish or open up the meaning of the scriptures with reasoning. So here, these beings, and Je Lama Tsongkhapa is describing what he himself sees, and so he says that they appear to be, to him, to be without the path which pleases the scholarly, which means understanding the supreme kind of instructions which are able to perfect the essential points of the teaching. So seeing this kind of situation where beings are, they don't know the points of practice, or they haven't heard enough, or they've only looked at the scriptures partially, they don't have the sort of intellectual rigor, the power to be able to distinguish the meaning properly. So looking at those individuals, he says then, my mind gives rise to joy, looking at the explanation of the tradition of the great great charioteers. So here, the supreme sort of instructions, the great charioteers have the explanations that properly are able to distinguish from that which is definitive, from that which requires interpretation, and are able to show how it is that all of the scriptures can appear in a non-contradictory kind of a way. So sort of taking a look at the situation of practitioners around him, and then looking at the tradition of the great charioteers, Nagarjuna and Asanga, he gives rise to a great joy thinking about their particular tradition.
Oh yeah. 다 대나 다 레스 되바 공도 셔바 군전 대나 아세 다 레스 되바 아세 다라니 내래 타바다 탐제 되바 되바 남기 아니 데메지 되고 매바기 아니 빈바 차왔다나 인바 미심바 세디 핀조다 라 가서래요 거기 핀조다 아니 가서래 랑진진라 다 주서 막 같이 쳐고 이제와 라브리나 신체는 맞잖네 빈바 차왔잖아 인바 미심바를 아니 좀 된대지 공바 좀 된대지 너유 공바 어느 콜로스미 공바 좀 된대지 너 콜로스미 공바 아니 신다 전부 누르다 토면이지 아니 시다 자와 와 토면이 어제 담보님 어디 가서 탐망 어디도 어제 담보님 단대다 탐망 어디도 선생님을 자기와래 다 다시 시원 받아 뭐지 시다 자와 신도 때문에 내용수 자와 장원 농도지 때문에 내용수 자와 제자와 니비 루지 제수 쇼네 아니 개완집이 세줄라 아니 배과래서 개완집을 세바게 아니 퇴섬지권에 퇴산지권에 아니 세바다 퇴섬기 퇴퇴된데 삼비된데 아니 곰대 아니 세줄라 배바르 그래 야
So, therefore, given all of the points as it's said above, those who wish good for themselves, so those who wish to be able to attain higher rebirths and the definite goodness of liberation and omniscience, they not sort of grasping onto that which is not essential. So they. Therefore, not grasping as essential that which is merely sort of like the husk of a grain, that which is fruitless for them, and having entered into this tradition carried on by the second Buddha, Gelama Tsongkhapa, that contains the complete essential points of the teachings, including the intention of the Buddha, the Bhagavan, as it was laid out by these two great charioteers. So here again, the way that these teachings were laid out by Nagarjuna and Asanga. Asanga presents the kind of mind-only way of understanding things, although ultimately he's a prasangika like Nagarjuna. The way that they have laid out the intention of the Buddha, and this includes understanding how to properly interpret that which is definitive from that requiring interpretation. So those who are wishing for good for themselves should enter in to this path, which is pleasing to the scholarly, which includes the sort of explanations and accomplishments of that tradition. So it's saying here that it is logical, it is right to make effort at hearing these teachings, reflecting on them, and then ultimately accomplishing them through meditation. So as they have been laid out properly by Gelama Tsongkhapa, all of the complete points of the essentials of the teachings are understood by him as they were laid out by these two great charioteers.
Oh yeah. 아니 배고그래 sembabarede 아니 다 다래 어텐데기 아니 가소래 셰루비지 인기 관한야서 렘바라 안된 제발제 아니 단조기 때 단조기 때 상부터 대양 아니 대셔와 아니 예바가와 다시 임바가와 달라는 그 단조 대지 얘가 특성을 제 예바 대양 나는 체들에 배고와 대한 아니 남실랑 가서 체리 유머를 뭐 시와이다 아니 체리를 배고 봐 체를 놓으면 받더라 아니 믿어보고매 믿어보고매 믿어보거다 시와 믿어보고 파연이다 슈피 템이 파연이다 마전 비념이다 아가는 공중을 나서하기 아니 체를 놓으면 봐 아니 체리 신의장 아니 매도 미루바 아니 두개 레기디 그 제수단에 마 아니 가소래 교환량 거와 인상 렌레 취미사와 야
No. So here, then it says that it is right to make effort at the explanations and accomplishments. So here, this includes all of the stages of the path, of beginning with the difficulty of finding the freedoms and endowments that we have in this life. So then one can contemplate the sort of difficulty of finding this type of precious human rebirth. There are many different points within the Lamrim of how to think about how difficult it is to obtain, how rare and how precious it is. And then the next point that it lists here is the fact that life has no leisure. So here, this is thinking about the fact that we have to die. So we need to accomplish the Dharma. We need to make effort at the Dharma in this life because we have no idea when we are going to die. And so we need to do this now. There's no guarantee that we will have this kind of life again in the future. So thinking about death and impermanence, one can also reflect upon the benefits of thinking about death and the defects of not contemplating death and so forth. And then it continues with the point that karma, cause and effect, karma, the results of karma are not lost. So here, this is referring to having a proper understanding of karma, that virtuous actions will lead to good results and non-virtuous actions will lead to bad results. And the fact is that no action that one has committed will lose its results, lose its efficacy, but rather one has to face the results of the karma that one has committed. So then this leads one into protecting one's ethics, abandoning non-virtue, and accomplishing virtuous actions.
Yeah,
So we'll stop it there.